Hey everybody! In today's video, I'm going to do some watercolor, not sped up, and I'm going to talk to you about underpainting in watercolor. Now I have this great lemon set that I'm working with. It's big enough to paint, and I apologize for the demon that has taken up residence in my throat. I'm not sick. I don't have allergies. I don't know what's happening. Maybe I just talk too much. Anyway, I want to talk to you about underpainting, which is a classic painting technique. A lot of oil painters do underpainting. But it's also really important in watercolor. And I know that a lot of people feel like you can't layer watercolor, but I'm here to tell you that that's not true. And depending on how staining your watercolor pigment that you're using is, it's actually a super effective way to get a lot of color interest in your watercolor painting. I'm using my kind of classic blending technique here, where I soften the edges of what I've just painted with a dry brush. The number one hardest thing to do when you're watercoloring is leaving white space. So I thought that this image was a perfect exercise for me to challenge myself to leave a little white space on this beautiful lemon. Now, while my first layer is still wet, I'm going to drop in a little darker, warmer yellow at the edges. That's New Gamboge. The first yellow was quinethalone yellow. One of my favorites, truly a lemon yellow, very clear and clean. And then I will use Mummy Bauxite to even deepen that shadow where the two lemons meet. I don't use some kind of fancy color theory when I'm watercoloring. I also actually don't look at whether or not the paints are transparent or staining or etc. I'm working from the Lydia split. This is the curated split for my Daniel Smith split group. It's the colors I use most often. And I just sort of paint from my memory of nature. And I don't worry about putting a granulating color on top of a non-granulating color, etc. Really, the ticket when you're making art is not to worry about anything. Just do it. We're talking about a piece of watercolor paper. It can go in the trash. No harm, no foul. Now I'm painting the shadow of the leaf before I paint the leaf. I'm using Undersea Green. I love this green. It's blue-ish. It's sort of a neutral green. Has a little gray. It's a stunning color. And when I have a really vivid focal point, if it's a flower or citrus in this case, I like my leaves to be a little bit more muted, but the leaves are where I'm primarily going to do the underpainting. Now, if you're dissatisfied with the way your leaves look, I have a tip for you in addition to the underpainting, where I'm going to add a bunch of colors to the leaves and then paint on top of them with green. White space is the thing that if you leave it out, your leaves will not look realistic. When people paint leaves, what I see is the veining in the leaf, they make dark. But if you look at a leaf, the veining is actually the lightest part of the leaf. So you have to leave yourself white space down the center of the leaf, and then the little veins extending out to either side. I remember the day that I learned this. I remember what I was wearing the day that I learned this. I was sitting out in the backyard painting some really ugly leaves, and I finally figured out it's because I made the veins dark instead of light. I paint outside most of the time, and sometimes I just get up and go look at a leaf. And I got up and looked at a leaf and realized I was not painting a leaf. I don't know what I was painting. I was painting some cartoon version of a leaf. It's terrible. It was terrible. I was embarrassed. Now, just like putting the shadow with the green onto the lemon, I'm also putting the lemon's color into the leaf. This is very important because this is what happens in nature. Unless you don't want to paint a natural leaf, in which case you're a free human being. You can do whatever you want. You can paint your leaf orange. It doesn't matter. Do whatever makes you happy. Now I'm coming in with Terra Vert, which is a darker green, also a little bit bluer, to really deepen those areas in between the leaf veins. This is all part of the underpainting. What I do at the end after I've done all this is I glaze on top of these leaves with a different color to neutralize some of the brighter colors I'm going to put in here, the purples and the golds that you'll see me add. Here comes the purple. This is quinacridone purple. My gosh, it's such a beautiful color. But there is a lot of purple and gold and red in leaves, and I want to add it because that's what your eye sees when it sees a leaf, but I also want to wash the whole thing down at the end to mute those colors out just a little bit. Natural pigments like Daniel Smith, which are mostly natural pigments, some of them are synthetic, they fade back quite a bit after they're dry. And so I want you to be bold about applying the color. In this case, I'm adding Aussie Red Gold, and I'll also add a little bit of pink. So when you're painting it, you're thinking, this is a crazy looking leaf, right? It's not, and it won't be when I'm done. It'll be a beautiful little leaf. Look at this cute little mouse palette. Oh my gosh, I love these mixing palettes. I'll put a link to this lady's Etsy shop below. She is amazing. She has the cutest mixing dishes. I like this one because it's good for traveling. It's tiny, but also it's completely adorable. Let's be honest. Now this is more of the Terra Vert, and I'm just watering it down. And I don't care if I mix in a little bit of this gray that was already in the dish. And now I'm painting over the entire leaf and the white space with this very washed out green. And this just tones down those colors, but it doesn't cover them up. That's the beauty of watercolor. You're still going to see those interesting colors through my little wash. And I'll add more later as well. Now I'm putting a really intense bit of shadow at the edge of the leaf, and then drying my brush and pulling that out just a little bit, blending it. You do want dramatic shadows between objects, or I do anyway. That's what I like. I like to see those edges, and I'll define that even more as I paint. Now I'm adding a bit more of the Mummy Bauxite, and I sort of have the qualities of these colors memorized because this is my favorite painting palette that I paint with virtually always. I do change it up from time to time, depending on what I'm going to be painting. But I know the ones that work together, and I know the ones that look like leaves. I know the ones that look like flowers, that kind of thing. Landscape colors, I'm just used to them now. And if you just practice and paint every day, you can get to really know your paints very well. Watercolor is a little bit different for me. I'm extremely loyal to Daniel Smith. These are my favorite watercolors in the entire world. In other mediums, I tend to try different brands. But with watercolor, I feel like it's a relationship that is a lot like a person. You have to get to know it if you're going to get good at it. So here I'm warming this up quite a bit and just brightening that leaf. And I will go over it again with a green, but I want that warmer color in there. And see how I'm just layering multiple different colors on top of this leaf? That's how you get an interesting, more natural looking plant, in my opinion. This weekend, I photocopied our old church cookbook I didn't photocopy it. Wow, my brain is not working. I scanned our church cookbook from my childhood, and there were all these fantastic little drawings that someone in the church had done of the food for each one of the categories. It was so cute. So cute. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I've painted a little more, and I want to show you on this last leaf sort of how I built those details into the other two leaves. I painted the lemon the same way. Now, this color is one of my favorite glazing colors. It's Indian yellow, and it's a wee bit warmer than the quinathlone yellow, but not as warm as New Gamboge. It's sort of an acidic kind of yellow. I don't know if that makes sense. But I'm filling in that leaf with that color before I go back and add some of the finer details like you'll see me do here. Now this is more of the undersea green, and I just want to show you how deepening the darks really makes that leaf look realistic. I'm just using the same colors on top of my underpainting and on top of the wash that I put on the underpainting. My last step is always to go add deep dark details. It just brings it to life, I think. And the other thing is, this is another thing I did wrong a lot. So when I was first painting, I would go into each of these little sections and I would do exactly the same thing in each section, which is a huge mistake because then it looks cartoonish and too regular. So you'll notice as I'm working around these leaves, I'll put a little dark spot here, let's say, like this one. But then I'm not going to do exactly the same thing right across the leaf from that. I'm going to skip, I'm going to go up like I'm doing here and make a dark spot in an asymmetrical section of the leaf. And that keeps it from being too regular. Human beings are nearly always incapable of randomness. That's how people get caught committing crimes. It's very hard for us to do anything random. We want to do regular things. So I have to force myself to move around these leaves and not do the same thing in every section. Because I found that my paintings were just very flat, and cartoonish is really the only word that I can think of when I did the same thing all the way down the leaf. Sorry about that little break. I don't know what was going on with my phone at the time. I don't know if my podcast stopped. I don't know what happened there, but I had to deal with it, so I cut that out. My darkest color in this section is going to be sepia. So that's a pretty neutral dark brown, and that helps me get the deep shadows closest to the leaf veins. And see how flat it looks before I do this step? It really looks very two-dimensional on that leaf. And I want it to pop off the page and look three-dimensional, and that's what those deep shadows help me do. Also, I can go back and better define the veins that weren't that well defined. So you can see how I narrowed that one down just a little bit. It was looking a little bit too big and kind of unrealistic. So now I take the sepia and I just add little dots as randomly as I can across the leaves. These little flecks of dark brown are one of my favorite tricks on leaves, because you know how they'll have little imperfections. So I just add little tiny, tiny dots with the tip of this brush all over both of these leaves. And I do it in dark brown, but I also do it in gold sometimes, because you know how a little bug has taken a bite and there's like a little yellow spot, or if you're having a rainy year and your leaves have yellow spots on them anyway. Those two things I do on almost every leaf that I paint. I really struggle with white flowers, painting white flowers in watercolor. I looked up lemon blossoms and they are white. So at first I did just a tiny bit of pale yellow and I didn't really like that. So I went over it with both a gray and then the sort of gray undersea green that I painted the leaves with, just so there was a little bit of harmony. But this is something I find very difficult. So see how those two leaves are a little warmer than the top leaf? I'm going to add just a little bit of gold around. This is quinacridone gold. I'm going to add some of these little gold spots that I was talking about, and that warms them up. But the top leaf is paler because of where my light source is. I don't want that to be as dark as the leaves underneath it, because to me, that leaf is on top of all the other leaves, if that makes sense. So my lightest things are concentrated at the top. Now here's what that looks like, all finished. This was just a joy to paint. This is such a great image. And I hope you will try a little bit of underpainting and overwashing and see what it does for your watercolor. Thanks so much for watching.